So personality is one of the more interesting mental illnesses in the DSM-5. It's defined as a pattern of relatively permanent traits and unique characteristics that give both consistency and individuality to a person's behavior. That's an important definition to remember. Traits, of course, are consistent over time, and characteristics are qualities that the individual has, including physique, temperament, and intelligence. In the DSM-5, it's a heterogeneous group of disorders. They're all coded on one axis, all mental illnesses are, and they are regarded as long-standing, permanent, and inflexible patterns of behavior and mental experience that deviate from the expectations of a person's culture and that impair social and occupational functioning and may cause emotional distress. This has been an upgrade from DSM-4. What you should know, all personality disorders are coded on one axis. They comprise, as a group, the biggest single group of disorders in the DSM. And these disorders, regardless of one's orientation, are notoriously difficult to treat. These are enduring and relatively unchangeable traits. And importantly, think of it this way, they don't get along with other people. So most of their problems are interpersonal. They include three clusters. Cluster A are otter-eccentric folks, paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal. Cluster B is dramatic and erratic, including borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. Cluster C is anxious and fearful folks, including avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now, we're not going to talk about the other four, passive aggressive, sadistic, masochistic, and cyclothymic, because they haven't been included in the DSM-5. But we will talk a little bit about passive aggressive because that one has a likelihood of actually getting in at some point. So paranoid personality disorder includes having four or more of the following traits. Now remember, these people are not psychotic. They're paranoid. Pervasive suspiciousness of being harmed or deceived or exploited. Unwarranted doubts about loyalty or worthiness or trust of a friend. Reluctance to confide in others because of preceding criterion. They find hidden meaning and read into innocuous actions of others. They hold grudges for perceived wrongs. Their angry reactions to perceived attacks or characteristics about their reputation. And akin to the first two criteria, unwarranted suspiciousness of fidelity of a spouse or sexual partner. So examples of this might be someone like President Richard Nixon. Remember, these folks are odd. Personality disorder. You have to have four or more of the following, but again, these are not psychotic people. They basically don't like being around other people. They lack desire or enjoyment in close relationships. They almost exclusively prefer solitary activities. They have little interest in sex with others. Few, if any, pleasures. They lack friends. They're indifferent to praise or criticism. They really don't care. They have a flat emotional detachment. So take schizoid and bump it up a notch, and you have the same criteria. They're not psychotic. They have ideas of reference that they belong to somebody else or controlled by someone else. They have peculiar beliefs or magical thinking, like they can predict things happening or change lights in a traffic light or things like that. Unusual perceptions or beliefs about one's body, almost delusional, but not psychotic. Peculiar speech patterns. I had a client once who spoke Klingon. He was a schizotypal personality disorder. Extreme suspiciousness or paranoia, not to the point of the paranoid personality, but they're suspicious. Inappropriate affect, odd behavior or appearance, and again, they lack close friends, and are extremely uncomfortable and have anxiety around other people. Cluster B includes the borderline personality disorder. These are one of the more vexing disorders in the DSM-5. They make frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, whether it's real or imagined. They have an unstable interpersonal relationships. They do things like splitting, where they either value or devalue you. Little children do this. Unstable sense of self, impulsive behavior including reckless spending and sexual promiscuity, recurrent suicidal gestures, and attempts. They can be genuine or to get attention, and they do things like self-mutilation, cutting on themselves. They're extremely emotionally labile. That is, their moods switch quickly. They have chronic feelings of emptiness that they're always trying to fill. They have difficulty controlling their anger, and they have paranoid and dissociative symptoms. In the movie Girl Interrupted with Angelina Jolie, her diagnosis was borderline, as well as Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. Chronic personalities have to be the center of attention. They have a strong need to be center of attention. Sometimes they're inappropriate, sexually seductive. They have rapid shifts of emotion, kind of like a drama queen, you might say. They use physical appearance to draw attention to themselves. They speak excessively, impressionistically, passionately held opinions without much detail. They have exaggerated theatrical emotional expressions, the drama, overly suggestible, and they misread relationships as being more intimate than they really are. These people, oddly enough, end up, a lot of them, with passive-aggressive personality disorders. Narcissist, of course, has a grandiose sense of self. They're arrogant. They have preoccupation with one's success or brilliance, beauty or love or intelligence. Extreme need for admiration. They have to be the center of attention, kind of like a histrionic personality, but worse. They have a strong sense of entitlement. They tend to exploit others, and when other people do better than them, they're envious. Maybe you know of some people in the news nowadays that might fit the criteria of narcissistic personality disorder. Social personality disorders. These ones basically start off as conduct disorders, and by the time they're 15, they meet the criteria for antisocial. And essentially, these people are untreatable, but some people persist. They repeatedly break the law. They deceive and lie. They're impulsive. They tend to be irritable and aggressive. That's what gets them in trouble, typically. They recklessly disregard their safety and the safety of others. They're irresponsible with their employment or financial obligations. One of the main criteria, especially over the history of antisocial or psychopath, is a lack of remorse. You have to be at least 18, and typically they have a conduct disorder before the age of 15. You might be wondering too, as we're talking about these, maybe you could have some of this and some of that, and actually it's entirely possible to have mixed symptoms. You could be a narcissist, antisocial, paranoid, and even dependent, all at the same time. Not just those four, but all 11 of them. Personality is in cluster C. They avoid personal contacts. Now, if you've heard of people that are asocial or avoidant, that doesn't mean that that they're against other people. It just means that they want to be alone. They avoid interpersonal contacts primarily because they don't want to be ashamed or ridiculed. They're unlikely to get involved unless they're certain of being liked. They have a preoccupation with being criticized or rejected. They feel inadequate and inferior. And they have extreme reluctance to try new things for fear of being embarrassed. So they just avoid. Personality disorder, this may be one of the biggest ones in the entire diagnostic manual. They have difficulty making decisions without excessive advice or reassurance from others. They need others to take responsibility for their major decisions in life. They have difficulty disagreeing with others for fear of losing their support, so they go along with things. Difficulty doing things on their own because they lack self-confidence. They're doing unpleasant things as a way of obtaining the approval and support of others. They feel helpless and alone because of their lack of confidence in their ability to handle things without others people's help. They urgently seek new relationships when a present one ends, so it's like any port in a storm, a rebound relationship. and they have preoccupation with fears of having to take care of themselves. M. Scott Peck, the famous Army psychiatrist, believed that this was the most prevalent mental health problem on the planet. The obsessive compulsive personality disorder, this is not to be confused with OCD. That's a different disorder. This one, the person is really kind of a neatnik. Their preoccupation pride with rules and detail to the extent of never getting anything finished. They're extremely perfectionistic to the degree that projects don't get done. They devote excessive amounts of energy to work at the exclusion of leisure and friendship. They tend to be inflexible about morals, pretty rigid. They have difficulty discarding worthless items. By the way, this is where hoarding used to be diagnosed as, but now it's got its own diagnostic group. They have a reluctance to delegate unless others conform to their standards. They tend to be stingy and miserly, and they have rigid and stubborn interpersonal relationships. Again, keep in mind all the DSM-5 personality disorders, they'd have a hard time in relationships. That's kind of the key to it. And the passive-aggressive personality disorder, they resist passively fulfilling routine social and occupational tasks. They complain about being misunderstood and unappreciated by others. They pout, they're sullen and argumentative. They make unreasonably criticize and scorn authority, but never directly. They express envy and resentment toward those apparently more fortunate. They voice exaggerated and persistent complaints about personal misfortune. Woe is me. They alternate between hostile defiance and contrition, so they may blow up and then feel terrible later. They procrastinate, put things off, they obstruct behavior, they resent suggestions, they often forget obligations, and they're unaware of how incompetent they are. This person often hooks up with the histrionic personality disorder, and they kind of complement each other. And it's interesting because many personality disorders actually do that. They seek out, or they end up with someone who complements and completes the whole that they have. We're going to skip better handles sadistic and masochistic, cyclothymic, and different parts of the DSM. So primarily the treatment of choice is individual therapy to help personality disorders deal with their problems, and then group therapy to help them deal with other people, because remember, it's a relational problem. And these people often need a long time commitment in therapy. Often the conflict ends up in marital, so you may end up doing that as well. So there you go.